We encourage you to hit the subscribe button right now so you can listen to more podcasts of Operation Truth. Ladies and gentlemen, we do want to hear from you, so we encourage you to email us directly at operationtruthofficial@gmail.com. I want you to know that your messages are likely to be heard, addressed, and listened to on air.
Operation Truth, the show they don't want you to see. Now, here's your host, Lou.
This is Lou Palumbo. With me today, and as always, is Tom Fuentes, my co-host, and we have another gentleman with us again, who we're pleased to have, Rick Robillard. Rick, by the way, is a former special agent in charge of a criminal division of the FBI. Tom, as I've reminded you on numerous occasions, is a former assistant director of the FBI. And where we left off last week were promising you discussions about a trucking organization out of Tennessee that was fined in excess of $700,000 because it asked prospective employees to prove that they were legally in the country. Now, there seems to be a little bit of a discussion attached to that. And I'm going to first come to Rick to kick this off with us and give us a little insight as to what you think is going on here, Rick. Were they right in doing that, number one?
You mean, repeat that, please, Lou. I didn't hear the question. I'm sorry.
What I was saying was that I was going to ask you to explain a little bit of the background or groundwork on whether or not we're permitted to ask people if they're legally in our country for the purpose of procurement of work. Is this did this trucking company violate somebody's rights?
The argument with the trucking company is this, that according to the law, the company can ask for identification, but it is up to the applicant to provide whatever type of identification they choose to provide. In a recent case in Tennessee, where a trucking company was fined $700,000 for discrimination, it was because they were insisting upon a green card as a form of identification. And that's contrary to public law. And so the Justice Department wound up fining them $700,000 because they argued that that was discriminatory.
So the question I have, gentlemen, is requesting a green card, which is tantamount to establishing your legitimacy in our country. Why is that? I mean, why? And this is a rhetorical question for us because it's something that's going to have to be addressed in the proper forum, like a courtroom. Why would that be an unreasonable expectation that you ask that someone be legitimate in our country before we provide them employment? I'm missing something here. Tom, am I missing something?
No, I don't think so. And I don't understand how they could be fined in this situation for that.
Now, let me ask you, aren't we required as employers to ensure the fact that the people we're employing are legally here? In other words, if you have a green card or a work permit or whatever we want to call it, it establishes the fact that you've gone through some form of a process to position yourself in the United States, possibly for future citizenship or as a student or for work purposes on a limited capacity. I'm a little confused as to why we're not allowed to establish you haven't violated our law to get here. And are we off base here?
No, I don't understand either, because there are steps in the process to getting your green card. That's kind of the final thing to have, to have your residency established in the United States. So the process takes a couple of years. Even at light speed, it takes a couple of years to get it. And while you're in process or in progress to get it, you're allowed to be here. You're allowed to work. So at what point, the company has to insist you have to have a green card? I don't understand that. I'm not familiar with that.
You know what I think, gentlemen? I think we should table this topic and see if we can do some more investigating to find out a little more in the background and what the law, what's prescribed by the law. I want to kind of shift gears momentarily to
Luke,
Rick, go ahead, by all means. Jump right in.
Just before we leave that, our country is extremely conflicted on immigrants. And let me give you another example. Recall all the debate and everything about the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare. One of the big issues was, hey, are we going to be providing health insurance to people who are in the country illegally? Well, the people arguing for absolutely not. It prohibited right in the law. And that's true, it is. But it's also prohibited in the law to ask. In other words, when you come for insurance or you come for care, we're not going to provide anybody who's here illegally that insurance, but you're also prohibited from asking for any form of identification to prove they are here illegally. So it's a cute little trick. You see what I'm saying? And some of these laws, I think, get passed because really, maybe at some level, we don't want to know. It would be why is the law written to say that the person who is applying for the job can pick whatever form of identification they want? Somebody wrote that law. They could have written they have to present a green card, but that's not what they wrote. We could have written into the law that in order to have any form of Obamacare, if you're not a natural citizen or if you're not a citizen of the U.S., you're going to have to provide some documentation that you're here legally, but we didn't do that. So, our country is really conflicted in itself as to how we want to let people into the country and how we want to treat them once they arrive. And I think that gives rise to some of these things you see. Well, why are we doing that? Well, we're doing that because we're kind of conflicted.
I think that's a really good word to define this country today. Conflict. Rick, when we're really looking at this issue, and you take a look at a city like New York, that's basically telling you they're hemorrhaging money because they are providing housing, education, medicine. I mean, in every direction you can turn, their hand is in the city's pocket, supporting people who are illegal in this country as a result of this president's immigration policy. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, it isn't just New York City that's experiencing the negative outcome of this immigration policy. It's cities like Chicago, Denver, Charlotte, Seattle, Austin, San Jose, Philadelphia, San Diego. And I'm listening to what's going on at this Tucson sector in Arizona, which has now been identified as the biggest point of convergence, apparently, and in the most trouble. I don't know what the end game is here. Tom and I have spoken about it before. Tom is of the opinion, and I don't want to speak for Tom, so I want to say this in context, but he thinks that there's a deliberate exercise to undermine and destroy this country by people that hate it. And I think they hate it because they have nothing better to do. I think they have too much free time. But this border issue is rather interesting because, guys, it doesn't only just translate to who's footing the bill. There's going to be an exponential increase in crime. I can tell you now, from what I've known about New York City, and I can't divulge source, there's a lot of criminal activity that's taking place with people illegally coming into the country. Part of it you almost might understand because they're in the streets struggling. What's so interesting is that it's been spoken to, I think, by one of you gentlemen, that living on a piece of cardboard on a sidewalk outside the Roosevelt Hotel on Madison Avenue and 45th Street is better than living in their countries. That's an interesting thing to try to wrap your arms around. But the migration issue is going to redefine this country, and the clock is ticking. And even though the loudest voices in opposition, did I mention El Paso also, by the way? The mayor in El Paso some time ago declared a state of emergency that the federal government came to and wanted him to backtrack on it. I mean, I don't know where, again, we use that word morality in our discussion about, how consequential is Israel going forward in the world of the United States. This word morality, it's an important word that we continue to lock our eyes on. But, I don't know where this border policy is going to benefit anyone. It doesn't appear to be benefiting cities, this country overall. I don't see it benefiting even the people coming here because they're kind of like locked in. I don't know what they're doing. And I have to tell you, I think there's a lot of resentment that's being harbored, not acted upon, thank God. I'm sure we will deteriorate to that condition, but they're not directing a lot of animosity, to my understanding, towards people that are here illegally. But it's a real sensitive discussion. I do want to say one thing to you guys. We had this attack in Paris. I guess you gentlemen heard about it. Don't know how much you've looked into it. We're still trying to find out. I think the gentleman yelled Allah Akbar as he started stabbing people. I think he wounded 2 or 3 and killed one. I guess the position now is we're going to start to take your cutlery, because more and more of these episodes, especially in Europe where they're really tight on guns, they're still perpetrating their criminal activity. They're just doing it with knives or, as Al-Qaeda says, use vehicles. What I continue to hear in our country is about gun control, which is just a big fat lie. It's just this political stunt to make people think they're supporting some form of gun control that's going to make you safer. None of what they propose is going to make you safer. What it is going to do is tie the hands of people that aren't the problem. I can only say this to you. We're jumping up and down about 48,000 deaths related to gunfire, which are critically important, by the way. They don't break it down how many are involved with suicide and mention the fact that 22 of our veterans are killing themselves every year, oftentimes with guns. I remind the American public of this. Last year, approximately 480,000 people died from cigarette smoking. We had 40,000 people die reportedly from secondhand smoke. I don't know why or when we got into this pattern of intentionally misleading the public, topic after topic, but we all know the vehicle, guys, that we're about to bang into right now, known as the media. The media is creating your narrative and your optic. And I think both of you gentlemen would agree with that. The question is oversight and accountability. Rick, you see any?
Well, Lou, you've covered a lot of ground there. I think that the issue of oversight. A couple of quick things. According to the most recent reporting, this year there will be slightly under 50,000 suicides in the United States. It's 49,810 or something like that. About 52% of those are suicides, are by firearms. So that's the predominant way to commit suicide in the United States. The broader, you've covered so many topics, but on the border, if I could address the border for a second, is
Sure.
It's not just President Biden. This has been a back and forth issue for decades in the United States as far as immigration policy in this country. If you're familiar with the term WAP, Lou, WAP,
yeah.
Somebody's a WAP. Okay.
Yeah.
That's derived from without papers. These are Italian people who arrived in our country, had no documentation, we had no way to vet them, but we let them in. Okay. We've dealt with situations where we had people coming into the country without paperwork. We're facing another one now. My thoughts on it are this. This is where I think where it's broke is. Clearly, we're having a surge of people coming through the country. They're not all terrorists. They're not all drug dealers. That would be a very small percentage of these people. These are people who are so.
How do you know it's a small percentage? I'm just curious. How do you know it's a small percentage? I'm not questioning. I'm just asking you.
Yeah, I guess I would say simply by a couple of things. By look at the number of people coming in. What percentage of those people are actually involved in criminal conduct? I don't see a massive criminal problem emanating from people immigrating into the United States. What I see is most of these people are coming here basically want to work. These are the people who are moving your furniture, doing the repairs to your kitchen. They come here with a desire to work and a desire for a better life. I don't think this is a flood of criminals. There will be criminals amongst them. I don't think you need these people to get fentanyl into the country. I think we get plenty of fentanyl without them. So I just don't see these as like a herd of horrible people coming to the United States to do bad. I think they're leaving their country for whatever reason. They're picking up their kids, hauling them across God knows how many miles. They get here to the United States. And the real breakdown here in our country, I think, is twofold. Number one, you talk to anybody, and I mean anybody you want, who tries to enter this country legally, and they're going to tell you about delays, confusion, problems, non-responsiveness, excessive paperwork. That needs to be fixed. So we have an orderly, timely immigration process into our country. And it's not just enough to let people into the country. We should also have an assimilation program to at least help them get started in our country. Without an orderly, timely immigration process and with no help to assimilate, where does it leave these people? You know, there's just a lot of issues here. I'm not sure we can go back and forth about the invasion of horrible people into our country. I just don't see that as the problem. I think the problem is we just, because of political conflicts, we have a very slow, very convoluted immigration policies in this country, and nobody's held accountable for it. No one's held accountable for that.
You know what, Rick? You made some very good points. The system isn't really properly designed. I got the memo on that one. But I don't understand how allowing people to indiscriminately access this country in the millions. And Tom mentioned in the prior episode that it was about 8 million. I'll guarantee you it's well in excess of 10 million. Guarantee you, because
Sure.
there's a number of ways into this country and to stay in this country. Prior to this administration, the majority of times that people violated our immigration laws were through overstays. And there are people coming in through the northern border. But, you know, you spoke to this before, Rick. You're right. We need an immigration policy, but there has to be some method to the madness. We are not capable. Let's first state something unequivocally true. Okay? We do not have the ability to vet people coming into this country from Central and South America to start with. They change ID like we change our underwear, for those of us that wear underwear. You see my point, guys? And that's irrefutable. Driver's licenses, birth certificates. We wouldn't know a driver's license from Guatemala if you embossed it on my forehead. This is one of the problems. Tom mentioned gotaways. They're saying in excess of 1.5 million gotaways, and that detected through technology like drones and cameras. Okay? You know, I hear what you're saying, Rick, but the reality of the situation is that this immigration policy is putting this country at risk. I hear everything you say. I say the same thing. We have to have a heart that when people traverse 2,000 and 3,000 miles to get to our border, they leave everything they know behind them, right? And they get to our border. They're doing that for a reason. The sad part is they're commingled with people that are of ill intent. Number one.
Sure.
Number two, we spoke about the crime. Do you trust anybody in this society today, especially in the political environment we're in, to accurately convey to you the volume of criminal activity that illegal immigrants are participating in? I can tell you of a couple of rape cases I know up in upstate New York, to be honest with you. How many rape cases at the hands of illegals are we going to say it was okay? You see, I say this, Rick. We've identified all the problems. Why don't we just fix them? And for some reason, we lack the resolve. But I want to go to Tom now because Tom has an interesting perspective on the border, and he's quite knowledgeable about policies, this administration and the prior administration. Tom, if you may.
Well, first of all, when you talk about immigration, if you want to go back through the history of the country, we never did have a policy of trying to help people coming in with assimilation. So what typically happened, even in more modern times, is that as individuals came in, then what they would do is migrate to where they had people from their country with a similar background, language, et cetera, and move into those neighborhoods, whether it was neighborhoods in New York City, or example, immigrants coming in from Yemen typically went to Lackawanna, New York, a suburb of Detroit, because other Yemenis had come in and gotten jobs in the auto industry there. And so now you have these new migrants coming in legally from Yemen, coming to Lackawanna because they know there's other Yemeni people there to help them learn the language or get jobs or find work in the auto industry or whatever it might be. So whether it's New York City, you had the various ethnic neighborhoods. Chicago was that way, ethnic neighborhoods. And people would come into those neighborhoods, whatever country they were coming from, and assimilate by moving to that neighborhood and finding people with a similar background. Now, whether it was Brighton Beach in New York that had a large number of Russians go there because there were already Russians there and that they could help them assimilate, or whether it was in Italian neighborhoods or Irish neighborhoods or wherever it might be, Asian, Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, you had people coming in and seeking individuals with similar backgrounds, culture, and language to help them assimilate, to move in. So we never had government policies that said, okay, you're coming in from whatever country, we're going to put you here. We're going to make you go there so that it helps you assimilate. We didn't do it all these years. But when you have a lesser number of immigrants coming in at a time, it's easier for them to move into a neighborhood. You're not going to have 8 million people move into Lackawanna, New York, so they can work in the auto industry. You're going to have a more, I guess, peaceful, natural flow of people coming in, looking for neighborhoods to live in where similar people with their background can help them adjust to life in the United States.
So what we're talking about, guys, is that there is some systemic failure. And I do want to point out something, because we're talking about the history of immigration. And there's something that's taking place today that I think never did before. In years past, like around the turn of the 1900s, people came here, they wanted to be part of America. Tragically, they wanted to have the identity of an American to the extent that they would abandon their customs and even their language, which is a mistake. My grandparents on my father's side were off the boat. They came to Ellis Island in the late 1800s. My grandmother could not speak a stitch of English to me, broken English, and that was being kind. My father was fluent Italian, never taught us Italian. I never had a conversation with him, but I wish he had done that. But this issue about assimilation, guys, Tom, you're 100% right. We don't have that policy. After we freed the slaves in the mid 1800s, around 1865, right? We failed to properly assimilate them into the country. Problem we're having today with the assimilation process is a rather interesting one. We can't even convince people to learn our language so we can communicate with you. We have generations of Latino children here that are still not speaking English to us. This is a really interesting conversation. It's somewhat complicated. It's indicative or consistent with systemic failure, a lack of leadership, which resonates through this country, maybe from administration to the administration. I don't even know what to say. All the points that you gentlemen are bringing up and touching upon are truthful, valid, critical points. The problem today is, how do we fix it? It certainly isn't by just allowing people to flood into this country because they're seeking asylum. I mean, I go back and say this to you guys. At the time of the founding of the country, the population was about 2.5 million. I don't think the founding fathers' intention was to allow everybody from all over the planet to make this their destination, because there is no way in reality, maybe in a perfect world, we're going to commingle people ethnically, religiously, culture, lifestyle, all these ways, language, everything, and everybody's going to get along well. We can't get people to get along in a block, in a neighborhood. This is a failing experiment. And I hate to go back and say this to you gentlemen that don't think we've overpopulated the country. I maintain my position, because the whole key is to be able to manage it. And you gentlemen are right. The ability to manage it is there. The resolve isn't. The IQ isn't, with all the smart people we keep putting in Washington, D.C. We're in a crisis right now, and it deals with the future of this country and the future of our young people. We can continue to talk about the immigration issue. we're all of similar thinking. We all agree. Let us be clear, guys. We need an immigration policy. We need immigration. We need to continue to bolster the workplace and introduce people into the country by need because it's morally correct. That's what I feel. You know, oddly enough, I don't know of another country on the planet that has immigration policies like ours. And I'm not saying these other countries aren't in crisis because it's all proportional, but we're in a crisis in this country, and it's being fed through a number of different avenues. The borders, the immigration policy is only one of them. You know, I'm now going to take you guys into this crime problem in our major cities. And we have our FBI agents in Washington, D.C. being carjacked by children, no less, and our elected officials. And it isn't just Washington, D.C. The carjackings, I understand, in Washington, D.C. are up over 106%. The homicides are up over 40%. You know, to say the cuckoo left the clock is to be polite. And it isn't just Washington. Philadelphia, with half the population of Chicago, has twice as many homicides. They call it Philadelphia. And this is going across the country. You know, there is a problem in America. It's in leadership. You know, we should have the best and the brightest people that were alluded to by John Kennedy's administration. I only go back and say, look what the smart people have done. You know, I'm sure you guys have some feeling about this Washington, D.C. issue. You both worked there. Am I correct? Rick?
Yep. Yeah.
Any feelings on your agents being carjacked? FBI agents?
Oh, yeah. No question about it. I mean, I live in Old Town Alexandria, right across the river. I look across the river, and I don't like to cross the river. It's too dangerous. But yeah, you know, yeah, it's like entering a third world country. But so let's look at this for a second, Lou, and I'm anxious to hear Tom's comments too. Is the District of Columbia already has over 900 carjackings. 66% of those carjackings are people with firearms. The majority of the people doing the carjacking are juveniles. Murder rate's up. What is the response of the DC City Council? What should we do about that? Lower the penalties for carjacking. This is actually a piece of legislation that passed the council, was vetoed by the mayor. The council overrode the mayor's veto. Fortunately, the Congress oversees the district and killed it. And now we're taking another look at it to see maybe if lessening the penalties might not be the way to go. Here's how it plays. Somebody a teenager gets arrested for an armed carjacking. Ultimately and quickly, they're released to a shelter. If the shelter is full, they're released into the population. They're let go. They go get another gun and they do another carjacking. We just had an example about 3 weeks ago. A young teenage girl was arrested for robbery. The courts released her to a shelter. The shelter was full. They released her, let her out. She got her girlfriend. They carjacked a car. Neither one of them knows how to drive. They took off, smashed into something, and killed one of the girls. You know, when you look at this, you start to think, well, what the heck's going on here? Now the city is saying, you know, maybe subsequent to George Floyd, we put a few too many restrictions on the police. Maybe we ought to take a look at that. Let's talk about some of the restrictions that are on the police in the District of Columbia. If a squad car is parked and sees a stolen vehicle drive by policy, they're not allowed to pursue it. If another district is pursuing someone, another outside jurisdiction pursues someone into the district police are not allowed to pick up the pursuit. There's a breakdown here for a lot of reasons. The society is breaking down. Crime has become prevalent. Honestly speaking, when my daughter goes into the district, they have a 20-year-old car that they take because they're afraid to take their regular car because it may be stolen or carjacked. So a lot of problems here, but one of the problems that we're seeing is a look at when you have a community, when you have a city council that has a perspective that the police are the enemy, that they are the ones who really need to be controlled, you know, you're going to wind up with a pretty serious crime problem. And I think that's where they are right now. Tom, what are your thoughts?
No, and I think that if you look at this latest carjacking, the report goes out, FBI agents carjacked. Well, look at the restrictions that have been put or what they're looking at. Two guys come along and they want to take their car. They can resist, they can draw their weapons, they can get into a gunfight, kill the two bad guys that are trying to steal their car. All kinds of things they can do, all of which will have a negative outcome for their future. The easier thing to do is just be embarrassed and say, you want this car? All yours. All yours. Thank you. And I think that that's what we're seeing in many jurisdictions of the police basically saying, we're not going to run after you. We're not going to report you. We're not going to fight with you. We're not going to do any of the normal activities that we might do in terms of a law enforcement action, because it's likely to have a negative impact on the police and on the perpetrator. So the best answer is let them go. And that's what you have here. So that car gets taken, later recovered. The two guys that took it, who knows where they're at right this minute. But the agents' careers are intact. They're alive and well and go to work the next day and deal with the embarrassment of being victimized, which, I can tell you as an FBI agent, that would be an extreme embarrassment that somebody hijacked your car and you didn't prevent it somehow. But in the modern era, that's what we have law enforcement officers doing. And it's better to let them go and not have a confrontation, not have a chase, not have a pursuit, just let them go. And that's what we have.
Tom, can I say something like, and what you're talking about isn't just occurring in Washington, D.C. as far as the police go. This policy is resonating in every major city.
Exactly.
There isn't a day or a week, I should say, that I don't speak to people that call the police and they don't come for a half hour, 40 minutes, 45 minutes. I've been in New York City, and this is not an embellishment. Sometimes a day or two, I haven't seen a radio car. For those of you that don't understand how the sectors are built out, a sector can be one square block with a radio car assigned. That's it. Sometimes two. How do you not see cops? In life, they say you reap what you sow. That's part of this discussion. The other part of the discussion that I find interesting is the skyrocketing acquisition of firearms. People are wondering, listen to our conversation, and we're wondering why people are gravitating towards guns in record number. They just had a bodega owner on in New York City this morning on one of the news media channels. I don't remember what it is because I try to watch them all. But he was complaining about, they called the cops. They didn't come for a half hour. I don't know what to say. What they're all doing now, they all want to go out and start to apply for concealed weapons permits, which they're legally allowed to do without explanation as a result of a Supreme Court justice ruling regarding the issuance of these permits. I don't know how much more crazy this has to get before we can get the public. It's so sad is because even when I ask the public to go and vote, we need change, not through violence, but through voting. To get them to understand the scope of the gravity of this problem that the three of us understand, that we're trying to convey to our listeners, is really a heavy lift. Everyone, as I say, is distracted. You're worried about your kids, feeding, clothing, educating, paying your mortgages, your rents, your car payments, your insurance, everything. And the public is just going idly by as they're destroying this country. And I want to say this to you, a minuscule percentage of this country is driving it into the ground. And we have the ability to stop and change the direction of this country. We're the most resilient country in the history of civilization. And as I remind people, your ability to stop on a dime and change direction is critical to your preservation. Tom, what's so interesting about this, and correct me if I'm wrong, the big topic of conversation used to be Chicago every day. Some of the focus is now shifting to cities like Washington, D.C., our capital. And I do want to remind you of something, Tom, that you said to me, which I found rather interesting. Not densely populated, not a lot of people there. Maybe that's why they can't be as selective in who they carjack. Well, they got is a lot of federal employees, and the FBI is one of them. So it really isn't their fault that they're hijacking FBI agents, Tom. There isn't a large enough variety for them to carjack. Is that what you were telling me the other day?
Yeah, we have to expand the population of Washington so it's a more target-rich environment for these bad guys.
We have to increase the number of residents, right? Because we're shortchanging them.
Yeah.
I'm surprised we're not being sued because we're not providing a larger number of people to be victims of crimes in Washington, D.C., among other places. Rick, you're chomping. Go ahead. What do you want to say, buddy?
I'm chomping because there's an old saying, Lou, big cases, big problems. Little cases, little problems. No cases, no problems. You know, the easiest thing for law enforcement to do is nothing. It's very dangerous to set up a circumstance where a police officer who is really trying to do their job is going to be presumed to be a racist, presumed to be something evil. And then the minute something happens, this cop is suddenly assumed to be guilty of something horrible until proven innocent. Well, if that's going to be the climate of a community or the country, then it's very easy for that cop to take 45 minutes to get to a call, let him shoot it out, and we'll come up and clean in afterwards. Because if I go in and try to stop it, and I encounter some type of a conflict, it might be the end of my career. So I think we've got to look at this thing not as racially black or white, because I'll tell you what, these carjackers don't care what your race is. You know, crooks don't care what your race is. They'll be happy to exploit you. We're just people, and when we got folks running around committing crimes, we need to stop that, and we need to give police the support and authority to do that. On the other hand, I think one of the big failings of the police departments collectively is it's extremely difficult to get rid of an officer when everyone knows they shouldn't be an officer. I believe that, and you can see when you see bad things happen that are legitimately bad things, not things trumped up by the media, but actually something wrong, like George Floyd. The officer involved in that had something like 20 complaints filed against them in 19 years, wasn't paying his income taxes. You can't tell me the guys on that department weren't looking at him thinking, what the heck is this guy doing as a cop? But try to get rid of him. I think that's the problem that needs to be fixed.
I want to interrupt you, and I apologize.
Go ahead.
Listen,
No.
you, myself, and Tom, we were all police officers. You went on, you went to the FBI, which was actually my intention. I won't tell you why it got derailed. Doesn't matter.
Tom blackballed you.
I beg your
Yeah.
pardon.
Tom blackballed you, Lou.
Absolutely. They dropped the ground on me, as we say.
Absolutely.
You know, we all know our culture, how incestuous it is. You know, it's not much different than the political environment. We basically rubber stamped and rationalized what our guys did that were wrong. You're right. There's a case going on right now in New York City with a police captain who I understand has been arrested, and the feds are going to grab him for kidnapping in New Jersey. This young man, I happen to know who he is, and he's had a repertoire from the time he was a sergeant in street crime of antics while on duty, leaving Manhattan, going to Brooklyn to visit his girlfriend, telling his cops that if they had an incident to tell their superiors he was on scene when he was in Brooklyn, and it went till he hit the point where they continued to promote him to captain. And I know about this because I was intimately involved in addressing him at one time. I won't get into any further detail than that. They finally, as he made the rank of captain, and the guy is what we call a zone commander in Manhattan South detectives. This is horrifying. We could talk about our culture all day long and its pitfalls. You know what's really troubling about all of this everything we talked about today, we can solve these problems. That's the part that really pisses me off. I don't mind so much we've made mistakes. We just wallow in these mistakes. Learn from these mistakes, put them behind you and go forward. And we don't do that on any account, whether it's how we manage our borders, our foreign policies, this lie about transitioning to electricity. Boys and girls, I'm not going off on this tangent, but I'm just going to remind everyone, if you want clean, cost-effective energy, you better start looking at nuclear, because fossil fuel ain't going anywhere. It's just another big lie. But all of these are issues that we can fix, guys. You know, I have to tell you, this is not the generation of policing that we experienced. There's nothing in it for a young police officer to car stop somebody today. Because if the occupant resists, becomes, how would you say, antagonistic, or even demonstrates violence towards that police officer, and that police officer has to use any level of force, he's going to come right under scrutiny. And you're right, he might lose his pension and possibly his freedom. We are reaping what we have sown. You know, this is a defining moment for this country. I think you gentlemen will agree with me. Next election, I hate to say it to you, and that's not because I'm a Republican. The city you're alluding to today in Washington is run by Democrats. So is Philly. So is Atlanta. So is Chicago. So is LA. So is San Francisco and Portland and Seattle and Minneapolis and Minnesota. Guys, what the hell happened to the KoolAid that the Democrats were drinking? Is this all about anger? Is this all about the mistake associated with slavery that we don't really want to talk truthfully about? Slavery has been part of this civilization since the beginning of time. Rome had slaves. We fed them to the lions. Everybody had them, the Dutch. And I remind everyone, blacks were sold into slavery by blacks, and Africans in Africa had black slaves. I got the memo. It was egregious. We should have known better. Let's try to go forward, but we don't do that, guys. We don't problem solve. You know what? We talk about assimilation. We've yet to help the minority communities assimilate into the mainstream of this country. We've compartmentalized them, and then we hope we don't have to deal with them. That's the truth. We're going to wrap the show today. Go ahead, Rick. Go ahead.
Lou, it's not in the interest of populist politicians to solve problems. It's in their interest to convince people they have problems. That's how they get elected.
Exactly. And exploit those problems.
Exactly.
Tell them you're going to continue to deal with these problems unless you elect me. And then they get elected. That's and the problems persist and never get solved ever. And this goes on. You know, the question I would have, Lou, we're talking about not telling people who to vote for or not to vote for, but how much change do we expect to come next year at the ballot box? Are we going to see a tsunami of change saying from the American public, the so-called silent majority, saying we've had enough? We want law and order. We want our laws enforced. We want our law enforcement officers backed up. We want a change. Or are they going to just say, no, we're going to vote for the same people we always voted for, the same party we always backed, and then, gee, nothing changes. How come?
Based on the election results, Tom, from November 8th of 2022, you touched on something. You know, I thought people had had enough, and they haven't. We voted the same people in our major cities that are responsible for the destruction of those major cities. In fact, I'm looking at Chicago. It looks like they went from bad to worse. Yeah. Interestingly enough.
They did.
In New York, just for the record, we didn't have a viable Republican candidate. I don't want to insult anybody, but no one with an IQ would go near that job. It's just not worth the aggravation. LA, Karen Bass got elected. Rick Caruso ran against her. Would have been a far better choice. We can't seem to get out of our own way. You know, maybe we're right about this. Maybe we just keep the public ignorant and dependent upon us and continuously reminding them of all the problems they have instead of reminding them of the facts that we can fix and change these problems, which is what drives this show. This show is intent on providing an option other than the ones we're living with every day.
Yeah, and if we're not going to have a wall created and enforced at the southern border, then do like our major politicians do. Do like Nancy Pelosi, build the wall around your house and hide behind it with your security guards. Forget about the public. Let the whole country get overrun. You don't care. You got a wall around your house.
That's what's going on already, Tom, with people with a certain demographic and
That's what I'm saying. And that's why nothing is changing.
Yeah, I hear exactly what you say. The people of affluence in this country have this luxury of hiring people like us to keep them safe, and also building these structures and employing technology that will further enhance their safety. But
Yeah.
at some point, the chicken will come home to roost. That's the reality of it. It's going to come home to roost on a grand scale. That's just my feeling. Bottom line is we can change the direction this course this country's traveling on. We just have to smarten up, get out, become part of the conversation, go to the polls and vote. Guys, we're going to wrap it for today. We've run out of time. You know, as you can tell, we can talk for another 2 hours easily on these issues. You know, next time we speak, I think we want to talk about this thing with the Ukraine, because I'm trying to figure out, do they have a definitive amount of money that they're going to put in and then stop? Or are we just going to continue to feed this thing ad infinitum? I don't know what else to say about this. We're also going to, you know, we never really spend enough time on the media, gentlemen. We should get back into the media and how much damage they've done to this culture, because they're at the root of this problem. They don't care what they say, when they say, where they say, or who they say it to, as long as they get their viewership, their constituents, you know, their paychecks, and they're killing this country. No oversight. And I don't think anyone would have envisioned the extent of abuse of, I guess, right, you know, your right to free speech. Big question there. We're going to hit it next episode, guys. I thank you for joining us. I do remind you to reach Tom and myself. It's operationtruthofficial@gmail.com. Please communicate with us. You don't have to agree with us. You just have to become part of this conversation and reintroduce some little concepts like civility, decency, and respect. All three of those words have left the conversation. Thank you for joining us today. Thank Tom. Tom, I want to thank you. Rick, I want to thank you. Rick, I'm sure we're going to have you back on at some point, probably sooner rather than later. Be prepared. Get a clean underwear change. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.